Hello, my name's Carol Sherriff. I'm a member of the International Association of Facilitators. I've been a practicing facilitator for 20 odd years, and I run my own business offering facilitation services. Recently, I've become interested in research and taken on an academic role, looking at some of the theory and research around collaboration and facilitation. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in this series of conversations with Adam Kahane.
But for me, the basic energy is important. 3 years ago, I was starting a new project in the country of Colombia after the signing of the peace accords that had ended this 52-year civil war. And I was working with a group of stakeholders in a very difficult part of the country that had a lot of violence, and the people were coming together, former guerrillas and business people and politicians and peasants and Black Colombians and indigenous Colombians, etc., to see if they could work things out. And it was a very challenging, very energetic workshop. And one of the participants is a fellow I'd met before. His name is Francisco Goodarou. He's a very well-known Colombian. He used to be the head of the Jesuits, and he had just been named the head of the Truth Commission in Colombia to investigate all the terrible things that had gone on during the Civil War. And so I was very surprised he was at this local workshop. He'd just been appointed to this big job, and I asked him why he'd come, and he said, well, he was interested in seeing, how you get people to work together, or how, what was involved in working across such differences. And anyhow, we started the workshop, long first day, was going quite well. And Francisco comes up to me at the end of the first day, running up to me before dinner, and he says, I see what you're doing. And so now I said, well, what am I doing? And he said, you're removing the obstacles to the expression of the mystery. So this to me was really interesting, and I've spent most of the last 3 years trying to understand what that sentence means, and I'm writing it, just finishing this week a new book which is about that. So this is the idea that the essence of what we're doing as facilitators is removing you could say, removing obstacles to the expression of the highest potential of the group. And so I have a long technical idea about what those obstacles might be. In brief, I think the basic obstacle is the conventional way of working. But let me just give you a couple of examples of what it means to remove obstacles, because I think those practical things are the way to understand it. So for example, it's always interested me that in our workshops, one of the activities we do, which is the simplest possible activity, is the one that everybody likes best and always puts in the evaluation forms they liked and they want to do again. And the exercise is the following. We're going to lunch. Could you look around the room, find somebody different from you, the person who you think is most different from you, who you never imagined be able to talk to, and go for a walk with them for half an hour before lunch. There's really nothing that could be simpler. And yet, oftentimes, it's really a big deal. So that's an example for me of a very simple thing, probably the simplest kind of activity you could imagine, but that removes an obstacle. In this case, the obstacle of disconnection, the obstacle of not knowing or have any normal human relationship with other people, or only having a formal or work relationship with people. And it's very significant to me that it's going for a walk, because when you're walking or sitting side by side, you're looking ahead, you're going through the world together. You're not referring to your papers. You're not on the phone. You're simply having uh, an ordinary human connection with somebody and talking about what's going on or what's happening in your life or whatever. So this is a really simple example, but this is what I mean by when Francisco said, I see what you're doing, you're removing the obstacles to the expression, the mystery. This is an example. You're doing as a facilitator, you're doing something simple, the purpose of which is to remove an obstacle that prevents people from working together. In this case, the obstacle of them not having a connection or a relationship.
So one of the things I really like in this book, and there are many of them, is that you liken conventional collaboration to like a planning meeting. I think, oh my goodness, possibly half my career I've been facilitating planning meetings rather than, and we'll go there in a minute, sort of stretch collaboration. And you also mentioned previously that this conventional collaboration can be one of the obstacles facing groups. So can you tell us a little bit more about, your frame, how do you think of conventional collaboration and where's it going wrong?
Yeah. So I also have started my career as a facilitator doing strategic planning. I was a strategic planning analyst in companies and at Shell, and my degrees are in physics and economics. So I have a very, I guess you could say, rationalist approach to getting things done, a rationalist masculine approach to getting things done. And so what I realized is there's a conventional way to get things done that I think most people imagine is the only way to get things done. And it has a very well-known series of steps. You could call this a recipe for conventional collaboration. First, you need to agree on what the problem is. Then you need to agree on what the solution is. Then you need to agree on what's the plan of activities to get from where you are now to where you want to be to achieve the objectives, to implement the solution. And then you need to agree who's going to do what to implement those activities. And I guess under some circumstances that works, but my experience is almost all of that is wrong or hardly ever works. But it's so well established that I'm guessing lots of people think, well, isn't that just how we do things? And so here are some of the places that goes off the rails. First of all, in a complex situation with different stakeholders who come from different parts of the situation, different parts of the system, they rarely agree on what the problem is, certainly not at the outset. I was taught early on by my teacher, my boss at Shell, Kees van der Heijden, that most important situations are not problems, they're problematic situations. They're situations that different people view as problematic in different ways. So the idea that there's one definition of the problem and that we agree it before we start, people sometimes say, well, before we start, shouldn't we agree on what the problem is? Let me send out a note about what the problem is before we start. And I mean, if you could, that would be nice. But in my experience, you almost never can because different people view the problem as or the situation is problematic in different ways. I mean, another part of this is it's actually surprisingly not necessary to agree on what the problem is in order to be able to agree on what to do. This is really something that's taken me a long time to learn that I think is important. But anyway, the first difficulty with a conventional approach is there usually isn't a problem, and you usually can't agree it, and usually don't need to. Secondly, often we can't know what the solution is. We can't know what will work before we do it. That it's only by trying stuff out that we can figure out what works. We could sit in this meeting room for months, and we wouldn't know until we got out of the meeting room and tried to do things what would work and not work. So the idea that we could have a plan and then just implement it step by step, again, may work in some circumstances, but not with most of the things that I work with. And the final thing, which I think is problematic, is this idea that we just have to decide who's going to do what. People sometimes say, well, you know, for the situation to change, people are going to have to change what they're doing. But what they almost always mean is those other people are going to have to change what they're doing. My point is that in these three dimensions, that it's clear the situation we're dealing with, and what's good, or what's the definition of the problem. Secondly, that we can know what'll work before we start. And thirdly, that we can get people to do things. I think most of the time, all three of these are wrong, or don't work very well. And so that's why I say that conventional collaboration doesn't have much application. And so I'm interested in what's the alternative.
Yes, so take us to the alternative, Adam, because my goodness me, you just described quite a lot of my facilitation.
So here's what I think the alternative is, and I call it stretch collaboration. And it has three parts that correspond to the three ways in which conventional collaboration goes wrong. So the first thing about conventional collaboration, it places primacy on the idea of the good of the whole, the harmony of the team. And the way this shows up is when people say, can't we just focus on the good of the whole? And I think that's intensely problematic. And the reason is there's never just one whole. I think it's a nonsensical and usually manipulative statement that there's always multiple wholes, W-H-O-L-E, involved. There's the organization as a whole, there's my department, there's me and my family. I'm part of multiple wholes. At the moment, you and I are a whole having this conversation, but you're also part of an organization. I'm part of other project teams. There's other wholes involved in this facilitation week. And the idea that there's only one whole and everybody should pay attention just to that, to me, doesn't make any sense and is usually manipulative. It occurred to me a few years ago, let's say there's a group of people being in a room, in a workshop with a facilitator. And the question I started asking myself is, there's only one person, maybe two in that room, for whom the success of the group as a whole, or the interests of the group as a whole, is exactly the same as their own interests. So who are those people? So the facilitator and the boss, maybe. For everybody else, the idea that the thing that matters most is the success of the group as a whole is not true. And so I think when facilitators say very, very glibly, well, just leave your agendas at the door, let's focus on the good of the whole, or the boss says that, they're almost always saying, focus on the thing that matters to me. So that's the first thing. And so there's a very ordinary word in English, I don't know why it's not used more, holon, H-O-L-O-N. And a holon is just a whole that is part of a larger whole. So in this conversation, I'm a whole in myself. I have a boundary, I have interests, I have needs, I have something I'm trying to do. The two of us are a whole. The group that is watching this video is a whole. And so we're so the first stretch is to embrace, is to recognize that there's multiple whole-ons, not one whole, and to embrace conflict as well as connection. That as soon as there's a multiplicity, yes, there's going to be some common interests, but there's always going to be differences, always, always, always. And to pretend that there aren't, or that they're a problem, or they have to be eliminated or ignored, to me is a super, super big mistake. So that's the first stretch.
And I found that personally really, really useful, because I came at it by realizing that, exactly as you say, if we're not careful as facilitators, who you sort of are aligned to is the boss, the client, whoever that is. And that, you know, there are many other people, if you're not careful, you're excluding.
To assert that there is just one we, I think is illegitimate and manipulative. Now, however, I think now this starts to get a little bit more difficult. And as I've been writing this new book, which is about facilitating, not collaboration in general of how people work together, but specifically, what does a facilitator do to support collaboration? So I'm focusing much more on this. And what I realize is that almost all the crucial and difficult issues in facilitation, or I would say all of them, are polarities. And you may know this whole wonderful body of work. Well, many people have worked on it, but particularly I like the work of Barry Johnson in this. And so almost all of these issues are polarities. And to take this particular one, we're dealing with multiple parts and the whole. They're both important. So we're needing to work with all of the participants or stakeholders horizontally, and the boss or the client or the leader of the organization. So every time I think, no, we should move from conventional to stretch, for example, I have to correct myself and to say it's almost all of the issues that facilitators wrestle with are polarities, and that's one of them.
Thank you so much, Adam, for being with us today. It's been really, really interesting. And also thank you to all of those watching and listening. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. I also hope you're inspired, and I'm sure you have your own views on Adam and my conversation. If you'd like to take part in that wider conversation, please feel absolutely free to post your comments on the Wilson Sherriff YouTube site, or connect with us on Twitter using @CarolSherriff and @Adam Kahane. I really look forward to hearing from you.